what has your backstory meant to me? Like, what happened in the games you've played with this character so far? So if you asked me, like, what's your character's backstory, and I'm a first level character, I might look at you like, what are you talking about? We haven't even played yet. Today's topic was inspired by the group of great gamers over on One Crit Wonder's Discord channel, Discord server. We have been talking about general things around RPGs and, of course, D&D. I have some announcements regarding that, so stay tuned until the end of this video for information on some upcoming games, a one-shot and then a series that I'm going to be starting with One Crit Wonder and some amazing other folks from the group. Now, for today, here's what was inspired from that conversation. It got me thinking about backstories. Like, what is the backstory to backstories? Where did that even come from? We had some great folks in the chat talking about their approach to creating a backstory for their characters, what some of their kind of general philosophy about backstory is, and so forth. It was a phenomenal conversation, and it really stirred my thinking about my own process. I've shared in the past some of the steps I use going into that, and I've also talked about, well, I've linked you to a video that I did where I actually had written out a backstory for my character. It was linked up with another player's character, and so I sort of combined the two, and then I actually was practicing the voice I was using, so I went and recorded a video reading the backstory in character voice. That was fun. That was really cool to do. I'll link that again so you can check it out if you like. Beyond that, let's just talk basics of backstory. I have to say, I wonder, for a lot of gamers that have been playing for a couple of decades, when backstory came into play for them. For the long time that I was playing D&D, backstory really didn't come into play because we were a bunch of guys that were mostly playing games that were sort of hack and slash, dungeon crawls, and we did some investigation, kind of like go find the artifacts, stuff like that too, but we didn't get very heavily into characters and role-playing. And what happened a few years ago with 4E, I started to see people getting more involved in creating backstories for themselves, or at least, I want to say, from my perspective, from the way I saw it, was more like character concepts. In fact, I had one real good friend who was making these super cool characters, but they were all like totally themed character. So like, as an example, this isn't what he would do or did, I just, as a total example, he might make a warlock character that was a warforged who was basically Iron Man. So think, Iron Man shoots blasts from his palms of energy, and so that would be your Eldritch Blast, and so that would be sort of the theme of his character, which is a kind of a cool way to approach creating characters, using a theme or a character concept. That was sort of my first introduction to characters in the sense of backstory and RP. But then once 5th edition rolled around and I got into a few other games and started seeing games like Critical Role or Acquisitions Incorporated and this sort of thing, I started getting introduced to this idea of a backstory, and this question started getting asked. What is your backstory? See, for me, up until that point, what is your backstory meant to me? Like, what happened in the games you've played with this character so far? So if you asked me, like, what's your character's backstory, and I'm a first level character, I might look at you like, what are you talking about? We haven't even played yet. So now it's taken on this whole new meaning, whereas before, at least for me, it used to mean like, oh, what happened in the other sessions you've played? Now it's more like, well, who is this character? What's their story? Where do they come from? What have they experienced? And I think ultimately, the fundamental, the one question that you could answer and you would immediately have at least a start point for a backstory is, why did you become an adventurer? Why did this character become an adventurer? And that's, to me, what a backstory is all about. It's ultimately about answering that question. Of course, other details like your family and your siblings and your life experiences before will come into play, and a lot of it could probably be tracked back to that one question. Of course, there's lots of other great cues, and there's some awesome surveys out there and things you can go. There are huge, wonderful resources available on helping us create backstories if that's something you're interested in. They're all out there. And I think it's really fascinating how important backstory has sort of become in this modern age and era of Dungeons and Dragons here in 5e. What's also kind of fun and funny to me is that, you know, I'm also of the old theory and the old way of thinking of playing that, like, yo, if you're playing a first level character, you might not last through the first session of play. And so you may invest like all this time into creating this incredibly elaborate and meaningful backstory, and then like a few moments or maybe an hour into the game, you get squashed by a boulder or rocks fall and you die or whatever happens, right? So, oops, I triggered that deadly trap. So, for me, backstory is something, ultimately, for me, backstory is something that I approach like this. I like to create a feeling for the character. Like, I want to know what's their personality type. Are they secretive or are they gregarious? Are they low-key and mellow, or are they like really animated and excitable? Then beyond that, like what's their basic personality type? Then I want to know maybe a little bit about like where they came from and why they started adventuring and becoming either a mercenary or adventurer, however you want to approach it. And then I actually like to let a lot of the backstory come through as it plays out. I will literally improv things on the moment, on the fly, that might all of a sudden create some backstory element. Like, for instance, somebody might say something about like ask a question about my parents for my character, and I might say, oh, well, my parents were farmers. And there, in that instant, I didn't have any idea about it before, but now I know my parents are farmers, or, oh, they were nobles. And for some of that, of course, your character, you could always use the backgrounds from the player's handbook to inform some of that. Like if you're an outlander or a sage or an acolyte or a criminal, what does that mean? So that might actually be a great place to start from, and it's another tool that I use. So that's my process. Figure out what's the personality type, figure out what their career-ish thing was before, i.e. like what's their background. So let me not confuse background and backstory, apologies. What's their background, and then I'll use their personality type and their background to then sort of flesh out a backstory. That's literally how I go through the process. And I think it's super cool that it's become so important for all of us modern players of this great game. Super quick, I want to mention, on the 24th on the One Crit Wonders channel, we'll be streaming a game using the Genesis system, which, if you're familiar with Star Wars Edge of the Empire, is essentially the same dice system, and we're going to be playing some kind of a sort of cyberpunk style game. I'll give you more details about that over the next few days. And on the 31st, I'm actually excited that on Wednesday nights we're going to be streaming a game with a bunch of great people, and this game is going to be Dungeons and Dragons. We're going to be playing the new Essentials Kit Starter Box Adventure. Dragon of Icespire Peak, or whatever it's called, I guess. I will have to make sure that's the right name for you all, but you can go check that out. And then on the 31st, starting that evening, come check us out over on One Crit Wonders channel. I will talk more about this and other things on the blog tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in. Keep rolling 20s. And remember, it's your game. Play your way. New friends and a few that I've... No. Terrible. I almost fell over here. Okay. Comes from a group of...